The final total was
7,381.
That is unreal. Sets us up so well for the next few years.
This season brought the craziest twist to Gold Rush, and perhaps even the most insane twist in Parker Schnabel's life. Initially, no one had any idea Parker would make such a massive comeback, but as the weeks passed, the readings increased and glittering gold piled up on the cleanup tables. Even the crew couldn't believe their eyes. After all, who could have imagined that $14 million worth of gold would be found in one season, and all at Parker's hands? Most importantly, Parker faced pressure from all sides this time. Fuel prices, machine breakdowns, collapsing cuts, Tony's new strategies, and on top of that, government inspection. But even so, the way Parker handled the entire operation was a sight to behold. At times, it seemed like the game was over, but suddenly a new high-paying zone would open up around a corner. This was the biggest suspense of the entire season. No one knew where the next gold patch would explode. The crew was shocked every time, sometimes 250 ounces a week, sometimes 300 ounces the next cleanup, and sometimes the readings were so high that Parker himself would exclaim, "Guys, this doesn't make sense. Something big is going on." This was the line that set the tone for the entire season. And now when the final tally was revealed, $14 million worth of pure gold, the entire industry was shaken. Fans online were saying, this might be Parker's greatest season ever. And honestly, no one could resist watching the next twist in this story. And yes, and one thing is clear. Brother, if you're watching the video and haven't subscribed, you'll miss the next twist. This story has just begun. What's coming next might change the entire gold rush. Within the first week, Parker's team discovered something that changed the atmosphere of the entire camp. When the survey team took initial readings at the new cut site, the numbers jumped in a completely different way. Normally, initial readings are low, but this time, the gold density charts were spiking straight up. The crew looked at each other, wondering, what is going on? Parker himself was surprised because receiving such strong signals at such an early stage is not part of a normal pattern. This was the moment when everyone realized something big was hidden here. AI-based ground mapping had identified this area as a high-potential zone, but no one expected the data to be so accurate. When they zoomed in on the drone scans and GPR layers, they saw dense pockets in the subsurface, as if thick, gold-rich veins were buried somewhere underground. The crew's geologist also exclaimed, "Guys, this is not normal. This looks like a deposit from another level." Parker's expression was priceless at the time, confused, excited, and a little scared that it might just be a false reading. But the next test readings put an end to all doubts. As soon as the soil sample was taken and placed on the table, tiny gold flakes began to sparkle in the natural sunlight. The crew's reaction was like a movie. Everyone's eyes widened, some started whistling, and others just stared at the ground silently. Parker simply said, "If the surface is doing this, imagine what's deeper." Hearing this line, everyone understood that this place was no joke. These initial readings generated a different kind of energy within the team. Machines were prepared at double speed, the mapping team began pushing scans to the next layer, and the crew's old gold rush excitement returned. Parker also realized that this high-paying zone might change the course of his entire season. The suspense was so strong that no one could guess how much gold was hidden beneath. But one thing was clear. Something big was about to happen. Collapsing, cut, and early setbacks. The season started with strong readings, but nature soon revealed its true colors. The cut Parker had hoped for most suddenly began filling with water. Due to constant rain and unstable soil, the walls gradually began to loosen. The crew initially thought it was a normal issue, but one morning the entire west wall suddenly caved in. The bulldozer operator had to make an emergency jump, otherwise the machine would have been pulled down. At that moment, the entire crew realized this could be a major disaster. The machines also began to throw up their tantrums. Excavator hydraulic lines were repeatedly bursting, the wash plant was repeatedly jamming, and heavy trucks were sliding on the muddy ground. With each breakdown, Parker's frustration became evident. He repeatedly shouted over the radio, "Guys, we don't have time for this. If this tempo isn't maintained, the season will be lost." The crew was also under mental pressure. As such, downtime at such an early stage is a nightmare for any mining operation. The atmosphere became so tense that one evening, Parker sat alone at the edge of the cut, looking at the soil, wondering if he had chosen the wrong spot. The production team was also whispering that this season might be the toughest of his life. For a moment, the crew thought, maybe this season is going to fail. The suspense was so intense that every viewer felt the story was heading towards a major downfall. But the setback didn't stop there. When they installed extra pumps to stop the collapse, the muddy mix began to be sucked inside them, further choking the machines, as if some invisible force was determined to thwart Parker's every effort. Days passed, but hardly anything was moving on the gold cleanup tables. Parker's face told them he was fighting an invisible wall and losing. Crew members even started saying to each other, if this continues, we're done. Tony Beets pressure, Yukon rivalry. Heats up. Amidst all these setbacks, tensions escalated when news broke that Tony Beets had expanded his operations to 3 different sites this year. The production crew also highlighted that Tony's machines were running at full power, and his first 2 cleanups were already impressive. This added to the psychological pressure on Parker. There's no greater attack in the mining community than comparison, and Parker knows this rivalry well. Social media was also fueling the rivalry. Fans were writing, Tony is crushing it this season, and some were saying, Parker needs a miracle to stay in the race. Parker seemed unfazed by this, but deep down, he was completely mixed. The rivalry wasn't just about gold, both ego and legacy were at stake. Tony made another big move. He acquired new land leases, rumored to be high-grade ground. Word spread among the crew that Tony might surpass Parker. Parker felt that if he didn't recover quickly, Tony would become the season's king in the entire Yukon. This psychological war forced Parker to operate the machines himself every night shift. Production also fueled the tension. The 2 cleanups were shown side by side, giving the audience the impression of a silent but dangerous competition between the 2. Watching Parker's setback, many viewers thought, Tony will easily beat Parker this time. This suspense made this season doubly explosive. Amidst all this, Parker was constantly battling himself. On one side, collapsing cuts, breaking machines, a drained crew, and on the other, Tony's unstoppable speed. Viewers began to feel that Parker might completely crash this time, and Tony would take the season's crown. But no one knew. The real story hadn't even begun yet. First big cleanup, a 300-plus ounce explosion. After weeks of wear and tear, collapsing cuts, and non-stop tension, the day finally came when Parker decided to conduct the first major cleanup of the season. The crew had been thinking the entire time that muddy cuts and machine breakdowns might have severely damaged the entire gold yield, but when the gold mats were spread out on the table and the muddy slurry was washed, the first major shock came. Thin, shiny flakes of gold were becoming increasingly visible. Everyone remained silent at first, but as the gold became visible, the vibe changed. When the final weigh-in began, even Parker himself hadn't expected such a huge jump. The weights kept increasing, 100 ounces, 150 ounces, 220 ounces, and then the final tally stopped at 302 ounces. The crew stood there literally stunned. Some stood with their hands on their foreheads, some looked at the camera crew, and some simply said, "Dude, this is insane." Parker's face momentarily froze in disbelief, then broke into a slight smile, clearly indicating he was relieved. A purity test confirmed that the batch's gold purity was approximately 91%, which is considered quite high by Yukon standards. By this calculation, 300 ounces shucked approximately $600,000 worth of gold. Hearing this number brought back the spark in the crew's eyes that had disappeared after the collapsing cut. Parker also recognized that this cleanup would change the course of the entire season. The machines were tired, the crew was drained, but this cleanup reassured everyone that the ground was powerful. Very powerful. There was a moment during the cleanup when Parker silently stared at the gold on the table as if reading a message. Then he simply said, "If the first big cleanup is this strong, imagine what's hiding deeper." This line ignited a sense of suspense throughout the camp that an even bigger jackpot might be hidden somewhere below. Mysterious high signals near Bedrock.
The very next day after the cleanup, The survey team again took ground-penetrating radar to the Bedrock zone. Parker hoped to find something special below, but the readings showed the crew such a signature that everyone literally froze. One spot on the radar screen revealed an unusually dense cluster, a wide oval patch with unreadable but extremely heavy signals. It seemed as if a thick mineralized deposit was hidden just above the bedrock. When they changed the depth calibration, the signal grew stronger. The crew's geologist said, "The signal is so strong that this is probably one of the heaviest patches we've seen this year." Parker remained silent at first, then pointed to the screen and said in a low voice, "This doesn't happen for no reason. This is something big." Some members of the crew were torn between fear and excitement. Some were saying, "It could be a pure gold vein," and others were saying, "Or it could be a mega pocket that's been untouched for years." The AI mapping software processed the data, and when the 3D layout appeared, everyone's spines went into a shiver. The model clearly showed unusually bright density blobs beneath a section of bedrock. Not one, not two, many. Parker himself realized that this reading wasn't like normal gold zones. Such a concentrated signal is only obtained when there's a very heavy, continuous deposit underground. The crew's reaction was one of complete disbelief. The Beets rivalry was still lingering, but this reading gave everyone a different level of hope. The suspense was so thick that even the camera crew was whispering, "If the jackpot is down there, this season will make history." Parker spoke just one line in the finale, which became the soul of the entire episode. "If this is real, then we're sitting above something massive." Parker's secret strategy. Double-cut gamble. Parker knew that collapsing cuts and machine breakdowns had already set the season back significantly. If he continued at the traditional pace, it would be difficult to even save the season, let alone reach $14 million. This led him to make a risky decision that stunned even the crew, running 2 separate cuts simultaneously. Mining rules consider this move extremely dangerous, as the double-cut method doubles costs, fuel, manpower, and breakdown risk. But Parker had only one thing on his mind. If the big jackpot is down there, we have to get there fast. The biggest fear of this strategy was that if both cuts failed, the entire season's earnings could plummet to zero. Fuel costs were rising rapidly. Spare parts were running out, and the crew was already struggling with exhaustion. But Parker said clearly, "There's a risk of loss, but the reward is much greater." Some of the crew were a little nervous, but Parker's confidence motivated the entire camp. The machines were split. One team was pushing deeper into the upper cut, and the other was carefully exposing the unstable portion of the west side. Shifts were lengthened, night work hours were increased, and Parker himself was seen driving the excavator for several nights. It was a moment when viewers felt as if Parker was literally running the season with pure willpower. Balancing 2 cuts simultaneously is a nightmare for any miner. But Parker was turning it into his biggest gamble. The suspense was so overwhelming that viewers felt either Parker will make history or the entire season will come crashing down. Because of the double-cut gamble, the production team was repeatedly whispering, "If even one wall collapses, both sides will fall like dominoes." But Parker had taken this gamble because he had a gut feeling that something extraordinary was hidden beneath the high signal zone they had detected. Ground behavior, density maps, signal spikes, everything pointed to something big, very big beneath. Hidden pay layer discovery. Turning point, the true impact of the double-cut gamble was revealed when the depth of the east cut exposed a new zone. The first few buckets were like normal soil, But one evening, the excavator's bucket suddenly developed an unusual shine. Initially, everyone thought it might be a random flaky deposit, but when they washed the soil, small but dense gold particles shone through. The crew literally stopped, and Parker received an immediate radio call. "Boss, you need to see this. Right now." Parker reached down, picked up a handful of soil, and rubbed it, and bright yellow specks emerged from the soil. He remained silent for a few seconds, then blurted out, "Guys, we just found something insane." Hearing these words, excitement spread like lightning throughout the crew. It felt as if the real gate of months of hard work was opening. When they exposed this layer a few feet further, they discovered it wasn't a normal pay layer. It was an unusually thick, gold-rich streak, extending across a large portion of the east cut wall.
Soil tests confirmed the concentration was many times higher than any previous reading. The crew's geologist was so shocked that he exclaimed, "Parker, this is high-grade material. This could be the turning point of the season." This discovery was like the moment when a hero in a movie gets his first glimpse of the jackpot. The crew was screaming, some of the camera crew were laughing in excitement, and Parker just stared at the ground, smiling softly. He knew the double-cut gamble had finally begun to pay off. The machines were immediately put into full throttle. Teams from both cuts merged to expedite this insane pay layer. Suspense was at its peak at this point, because if this layer was this strong, there might be even richer pockets hidden somewhere underneath. Multiple cleanups back to back. Weekly gold explosion. After finding the hidden pay layer, Parker had the machines running literally 24/7. Each team was filled with energy, as if everyone was now convinced that something big was waiting below. The first cleanup came, 250 ounces. The crew wasn't expecting such a big jump, but seeing that pile of gold on the table, everyone's eyes lit up. Purity was good. The valuation was approaching $500,000. Parker simply said, "Good start. Keep the pace." But the real shock came the following week. The machine's non-stop digging and newly exposed streaks led to 280 ounces in the second cleanup. The crew remained silent for a few seconds, as if unable to comprehend how these huge numbers were coming one after another. Parker also admitted that this was the most unexpected growth phase of the season. Approximate value around $560,000, $1 million worth of gold in just 2 weeks. Then came the third week, and it completely changed the atmosphere of the entire camp. 320 ounces? Yes, 320 ounces in a single cleanup. This average broke the record. Everyone's hands were literally shaking while weighing the truckloads of gold recovered from the soil. The table shone so brightly that the camera crew lowered the filter. This batch was worth approximately $640,000. Crew members hugged each other, and Parker smiled and said, "This is insane, but we're not stopping." The fourth week saw a slight decline, but the numbers were still unbelievable. 290 ounces. This was no small feat. In total, Parker had recovered approximately 140 ounces by mid-season, valued at roughly $4 or $5 million. This 4-week streak was so crazy that even the production team repeatedly said, "Viewers won't believe this." This non-stop gold explosion shook the entire Yukon. Other miners began making comparisons, and fans were saying that Parker had become unstoppable. But Parker knew when numbers start coming in this high, that's when real trouble arises. Government inspection and legal tension. The very next week after the gold explosion, 3 government vehicles suddenly pulled up at the camp. The crew couldn't understand at first whether this was a routine check or a major legal problem. As soon as they arrived, the inspectors asked for documents, claim papers, water usage data, environmental compliance reports. The atmosphere became heavy, as if a cloud of tension had fallen in the air. Parker himself came forward and began showing the inspectors the area, but fear was clearly visible on his face. A government shutdown is the biggest risk in mining operations, because once a red flag is issued, machines, crew, and everything are destroyed. A whisper started among the crew. If this shutdown happens, the season is over. The inspectors were checking everything in great detail. They tested the water in the wash plant, took photos of the fuel storage, and inspected the drainage system 3 times. All this activity suggested a major complaint or report had reached the higher-ups. And if that was the case, the situation could have been very bad. There was a moment when the inspector, looking at an unstable section of the East Cut, said, "This area might be unsafe for further digging." Hearing this, the crew's faces fell. If that area were closed, reaching the high-paying layer would be nearly impossible. Parker also realized he was walking a very thin line. On one side, a jackpot worth millions, on the other, the threat of legal shutdown. The inspection lasted 4 hours, and during that time, no one in the camp spoke aloud. All the machines stood idle, as if the entire season had been holding their breath. Even the production crew had turned off their cameras and stood still. As the inspectors left, Parker took a deep breath and said, "We got lucky today, but this isn't over." Parker's emotional breakdown and comeback decision. After the tension of the government inspection, the atmosphere in the camp remained heavy for several days. The machines were running, but the crew's body language revealed that the same fear lingered in everyone's mind. If another inspector came and issued a red flag, the entire season would be over. That night, Parker sat alone by the campfire. The air was cold, but even colder was brewing within him. His face was tired, his eyes were frustrated, and his mind was filled with one question: am I losing? A camera crew was also capturing the moment from a distance, but no one wanted to intrude on his personal space. Parker picked up a lump of dirt, rubbed it in his hands, slowly dropped it, and muttered to himself, "So much hard work, so many risks, and yet we're under pressure from every direction." After a while, he took a deep breath, stared off into the darkness of the night, and suddenly said, "I didn't come here to lose." This line was so powerful that it seemed Parker wasn't just motivating himself. He was warning the entire season. A few minutes later, some crew members arrived, but Parker didn't seem upset. Instead, he stood up and gave a short, tough speech. "Guys, problems aren't our enemies. Problems are our tests. If we break, we'll lose. But if we stand firm, this season will be ours." The crew silently nodded. After that night, the energy completely shifted. The machines went into full throttle again. Double shifts began. The crew members silently made a pact. For Parker, and for this season, we won't back down. That night wasn't a breakdown for Parker. It was his rebirth moment. The $1 week, biggest cleanup of the season. Just days after Parker's emotional comeback, something happened that turned the narrative of the entire season upside down. The East Cut suddenly began to pick up speed, and the hidden streak in the deeper layer turned out to be so rich that gold flakes were clearly visible in every bucket. The crew would look at each other and say, "If the buckets are this strong, the cleanup will be crazy." When cleanup day arrived, the vibe was different. Mats were spread out on the table, the water pressure was increased, and as soon as the first mats were washed, the gold literally sparkled. The crew's faces filled with shock. Each tray held so much that the weighing pan was repeatedly overflowing. Parker knew from just a glance at a couple of trays that this wasn't a normal cleanup. It was something monstrous. Weighing began 100 ounces, 200, then 350. Then by the time it reached 420 ounces, the crew's eyes widened in disbelief. But the counter didn't stop there. As soon as the final tray was weighed, the number appeared on the screen, 503 ounces. The entire wash plant area fell dead silent for a few seconds. Then screams, applause, and laughter erupted simultaneously. The purity test confirmed that the gold was 91% high purity, which means a valuation of approximately $1,000 was $1 million. Yes, $1 million worth of gold in just 1 week. As Parker saw the results, he threw his head back, closed his eyes, and took a deep breath, as if months of weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The crew stood around him, all smiling, some even with tears in their eyes. This wasn't just gold. This was the biggest comeback of the season. Parker uttered just one line at that moment. This is why we don't quit." And that was the moment that made the entire camp realize that Parker wasn't just digging. He was making history, Tony Beets reaction, rivalry. Peaks after Parker's $1 million cleanup went viral, the entire atmosphere in Yukon changed. Fans on social media were divided, some chanting, "Parker is unstoppable this year," while others wrote, "Tony Beets will crush him, just wait." The rivalry became so intense that Gold Rush hashtags began trending constantly. The production crew also heated up the competition by showing footage of the two miners side by side. Tony Beets displayed his classic attitude about Parker's massive cleanup, saying, "Found a good patch of gold, so what? Real miners win with consistency." His line ignited the show. His crew also offered mixed reactions to Parker's success, some impressed, some sarcastic. Tony was clearly feeling the pressure, but refused to admit it. He repeatedly repeated, "We'll see who's boss by the end of the season." The fan battle was the craziest. People began debating on Reddit and Facebook groups. Parker made an impossible comeback versus Tony is still the king of the Yukon. Viewers felt like a silent war was going on between the two, where every cleanup felt like a new punch. The rivalry was at its peak, and the true climax of the season was yet to come. Final push, machines 24/7, team exhausted. The final month of the season was the most dangerous phase for Parker and his crew. They knew that if they were to reach the 14 million milestone, double shifts and non-stop digging were the only way. Machines were running non-stop day and night, exhaust fumes filled the air, and the crew was so exhausted that many fell asleep during breaks. But nobody quit. Parker's comeback speech was still fresh in everyone's minds. But as the hard work increased, so did the breakdowns. The wash plant began to clog, hydraulic pumps were overheating, and one night an excavator's track suddenly broke, halting the entire operation for half the night. The fear among the crew was palpable. If the machines continued to fail, they wouldn't be able to reach 14 foreigners. Parker drove the excavator himself many nights and sometimes carried a toolbox to perform repairs with the mechanics. Suspense was at its peak. Can these guys keep pace until the end? The production team also repeatedly chanted, "If they slip now, everything collapses." Every day was a new race, with time, with breakdowns, and with Tony Beets' rapid progress. But Parker's eyes were fixed on the jackpot zone that had reversed the trend of the entire season. The final tally, $14 million gold reveal. Finally, the big day arrived, the last and biggest weigh-in of the season. The entire camp gathered around cleanup tables. Camera crews, mechanics, truck drivers. Everyone wanted to be a part of that golden moment. As the weighing began, the numbers climbed rapidly. 200 ounces, 400 ounces, 700 ounces, and then the final tray hit the jackpot. The total season tally, 6,800 plus ounces of gold, with a valuation of nearly 14 million. The purity average was also excellent, in the 90–92% range, making the final amount even stronger. The crew was in tears, some were shouting, some were dancing atop machines in celebration of victory. Parker himself remained silent for a few seconds, as if he couldn't believe such a huge target had finally been reached. Then, looking at the gold trays lying on the ground, he took a deep breath and slowly said, "If this is what we found this season, imagine what's still left out there." Hearing this line, the entire camp fell silent, as if everyone understood that the story wasn't over yet. It was just beginning. The outro simply needed a strong CTM. Guys, if you're enjoying this journey, then definitely subscribe. The next season hasn't even started, and the twists are already hot. If you miss it, the entire story will remain incomplete. And with this explosive moment, Parker concluded his most legendary season.